All right, time for some more Penn State Blitz and always the Penn State Blitz podcast. I'm Bob Flounders, joined by Greg Pickel. It is a NFL opening Thursday as we do this, Greg, but we're gonna stick to college. We're gonna stick to Penn State. We got a lot to get to with regard to Nolan Rucci's commitment that did not involve Penn State, but we're going to start with the Penn State program, athletic programs, latest result regarding COVID-19 tests. It's not quite the same as it has been recently. We're going to talk about the latest going on in the Big Ten with regard to any kind of possible restart, some news involving Nebraska, kind of where the Big Ten sits as we are now into the second week in September. I mentioned Rucci. We're going to get to the mailbag to close it out, talk a little failed Kentucky Derby picks and some other maybe questions and queries that you guys might have. But Greg, great to see you. The NFL is starting. Penn State season is not. One of the reasons Penn State season is not, Greg, is because of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Let's start there. For the last several weeks, Penn State Athletics has been releasing like the latest update with regard to testing of, I believe it's all athletes, not just football players. But they had a little issue, not a little issue, they had a significant issue with the latest round of testing. Where does Penn State Athletics and the football team kind of sit as we talk about it with regard to their COVID-19 testing?
Yeah, Bob. So obviously Penn State put out its release yesterday. It was 48 of 920 student athletes tested between August 31 and September 4 came back as positive. So when a program gets to 5.0% positivity or greater, they shut that program down for precautionary reasons until we don't know until when, but we can assume that it's until a quarantine period passes and some other tests are taken, so on and so forth. But then we learned later Wednesday that of the programs shut down, we know now that football is not one of them, men's basketball is not one of them, and the ice hockey program is not one of them. So we still don't know exactly which programs are shut down, but Penn State football is practicing with Thursday. They're practicing Friday. As of now, we're recording this Thursday morning, so there's always time for things to change. But so far, so good for James Franklin's program in that regard. It sounds like the protocols James Franklin thought they had in place and were working really well prior to the Big Ten shutdown, Bob, are continuing to work. Keep in mind they get 12 hours a week with the guys, 1 hour. They get 5 hours total or 1 hour over 5 days to be on the field and in helmet. So I guess so far so good. Obviously not great to see some other programs had to get to this point, but at this moment in time, the football program's not among them.
Yeah, does this almost qualify as an extremely pleasant surprise, given the fact that I think Iowa's had some setbacks in the state, and that was one of the programs that was pushing hard to play football even before, going back into the summer. Maryland had to pause. Michigan State had to pause. I think there were some issues with Ohio State. And here, James Franklin's program, a lot's happened, and they still continue to, really show that they've been very serious about the protocols, not a lot of positive tests. I think James actually sent the players home at one point after the Big Ten postponed the season. You have students back on campus now, so there's a little bit more of a risk there. But for them to be almost in the middle of September and not having any issue at all with regard to testing, does that qualify as a pleasant surprise, would you say?
Yeah, I think it's both a pleasant surprise and probably a major agitation because they did everything they had to do or they thought they needed to do to make sure they could play this fall. And then it still ended up not mattering, or at least it hasn't yet. The saga continues to unfold. Overnight, they came out that Wisconsin football was going to shut down for 2 weeks. So, as we continue to hear about this late October start, when you have programs shutting down, Bob, that pushes back the time that they're going to need to get ready to play. And it's going to be hard. There's no doubt about it. Now, there's a lot of schools moving to online-only learning, and that would set up more of a summer-like situation, if you will, where the athletes would be kind of by themselves, and they could get back into a place where maybe they aren't around the general student population or other people, and that would potentially help get them to a point where most of the Big Ten would be ready to play. But we still don't know if they're going to flip this vote. I mean, they need to flip, 9 presidents, I think. somewhere between 6 and 9 at least. So it's going to be a challenge. And as far as we know, they still don't have testing in the Big Ten. The Pac-12 has an agreement on rapid testing. I don't believe they have that rapid testing in hand yet, though. Seems hard to me to restart anything without having that in hand. So the Big Ten might be closer to obtaining that, or maybe they have already obtained it if they haven't said so publicly. So the drama continues, man. It's there's a different little news nugget or angle out there seemingly every day.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. You can't go more than a couple hours during daylight without a new quote unquote source coming with some kind of news. And then, 20 minutes later, another source kind of disputes the original source. And it's just, Twitter is a mess. Social media is a mess. Let's touch on a couple of things. They're still trying to float an October possibility of a restart. I think a lot of that has to do with October is really, Greg, if there's going to be a restart, Greg, and it would have to be in October if they want to have any part of the college football playoff. Thanksgiving gets floated. The University of Nebraska is in the middle of all of this. They're clearly still not happy. There is, I think, a lot of unrest. I saw something last night hinting that Kevin Warren and the Big Ten have established a task force to kind of expedite the return to playing. Now, whenever that is, we don't know, but the committee is supposed to be made up of, presidents and chancellors and medical people and athletic directors and hopefully some football coaches. And I'm pretty sure I saw last night, I hope I'm not fanning the flames of something that's not true. I could have swore I saw something about they're close to making some kind of announcement, maybe by this weekend, maybe by early next week. It might not necessarily be what the fan bases want to hear. It might not be necessarily what the players want to hear. But did you see that too? Do you believe there's something in the works maybe with them, some kind of an update from that task force that they've established to kind of get this Big Ten conference back on track to playing at some point in the next couple months?
Yeah, I would like to think so, because that would make our lives easier, right? And I think that listeners and the fan base would be thrilled. But here's the problem. Last week, there was supposed to be a weekend vote. That never happened. Now this weekend, there's going to be a weekend vote. Or maybe it'll be Sunday, or maybe it'll be next Monday or Tuesday, or maybe it'll be Wednesday of next week. We keep hearing about this vote stuff going on, and then no vote. And it's almost like the boy that cried wolf at this point. And again, we've heard Sandy Barber talk. She's co-chairs with the Ohio State team physician, the Big Ten. Let me see if I get this right. The Big Ten's Return to Play Task Force Medical Subcommittee. It's a lot. That's a mouthful. But so she's obviously involved in this, and she had said last week on the coaches show that they were a little bit quieter than the Pac-12 in terms of where they were in terms of all this. They might just be waiting until they get everything. Of course, the way the Big Ten's bungled the messaging of all this all along, Bob, it's hard to believe anything at this point. Social media has run rampant with rumors for weeks now. We've been close to a vote, then there's not a vote, then this, that, and the other thing. So again, I think it'd be great if we all could have a target date to look forward to. I'm just not optimistic that this weekend's going to bring the news that the last couple of weekends it's not.
You're probably right. They've been slow, deliberative since March about all of this. Why change now? They've made their decision. At least it sounds like they've made their decision, and a lot of people are unhappy. So I think the next update, it is hard to see them coming off their original position unless there is just some really, really good news with regard to medical updates or vaccine updates or testing updates. It's just, it's really hard to believe they're going to do that. And I don't know why they would be in a hurry. If anything, I would think maybe they want to be slower about this because I think they made their decision, and I don't think there's a lot of them, like you said. There's 14 parties that are going to vote, and 11 voted to postpone indefinitely. To get them to reverse course, I think would take a lot. I think you're right. But that was the latest rumor that I saw last night. But there's been a lot of propaganda out there. There's been some bad information out there. So we might as well just wait, Greg, sit tight, and just hope for the best. We're about halfway through this Penn State Blitz, the Penn State Blitz podcast. We still have a lot of recruiting news to get to, including Nolan Rucci, unfortunately. But Greg, how can our listeners and our viewers subscribe, get our podcast, get our Blitz videos, and how can they where can they go to evaluate us on the job that we're doing?
Yeah, you got it, Bob. The PennLive Penn State Blitz podcast is found weekly wherever you get your audio, be it on Apple, Spotify, Google. You can like, rate, and subscribe. If you subscribe, you might get the podcast a little bit earlier than everybody else gets it, so please don't forget to do that. And if you prefer the video version of the PennLive Penn State Blitz, it's at youtube.com/allpennstate. And you can like and subscribe and comment on that page as well. So give us some feedback. Let us know what you want us to talk about, or maybe what you don't want us to talk about. We'll see what we can do over the weeks to come.
Okay, so let's get to it. Let's talk recruiting. Now, technically, there was some good news recently with the addition of Ken Talley to the class of 2022. But, Greg, I don't really think that is what maybe the majority of the Penn State fan base wants to focus on at the moment.
Yeah.
There was a big announcement earlier this week involving Nolan Rucci, the five-star offensive lineman, I believe from Warwick. He is the son of Todd Rucci, who was a very good player at Penn State who played in the NFL. We always knew, Greg, it was going to probably be down to Penn State and Wisconsin. Nolan's older brother, plays at Wisconsin. There have been a lot of tea leaves to read in the last month, but I do remember, I think for a while, you've been saying it was Wisconsin 1 and maybe Penn State 1A. As it turned out, Greg, I guess that is the way that it played out. He did announce for Wisconsin. What are just one or two key takeaways or points of information you want to pass along, whether to clarify a perception or just maybe educate the Penn State fans just a little bit? There's been a lot of analysis. There's been a lot of, I would say, negative articles regarding the state of Penn State recruiting with regard to the state of Pennsylvania. I think there's probably some valid points there. But what are one or two maybe takeaways or thoughts that you have, either their big picture or people have gotten some things wrong, that just stand out to you regarding Penn State's recruitment of Nolan Rucci and the fact that he chose to go out of state to Wisconsin?
Yeah, I would just say this. Obviously, the Rucci family has been very complimentary of the job that Penn State's coaching staff did in recruiting Nolan. But at the end of the day, it's clear he wanted to play with his brother, kind of set his own path at Wisconsin. And I guess the bigger issue for Penn State is that the last couple of years with the top player in Pennsylvania, there's always some kind of little reason why they lose out. This year, it's Nolan Rucci's brothers at Wisconsin. Last year, it was Julian Fleming kind of wanted to blaze his own path and maybe get out of the shadow of State College and Penn State. You know, the year before, it was this, that, and the other thing. And the problem is, when Penn State signed the Micah Parsons class, they've had a couple of years now where the next class was always going to be the big class and the one to push it over the top. And now Mike is gone, so you've lost a chance to pair a quote-unquote big class with him. Even though they haven't recruited poorly, you may be able to make the argument that this year hasn't gone as according to plan, and Rucci's certainly a part of that conversation. But, I mean, they've recruited, fairly well for the most part. But at the same time, Bob, when you talk about getting in that mix with Ohio State and Clemson and Alabama and LSU and so on and so forth, Oklahoma, you have to eventually start. You can't keep losing the top player in your state to other teams, and especially other Big Ten teams. And so now the focus turns to 2022, and that's going to be the monster year for Penn State. And look, they already have a number 3 ranked class in the country. They get Ken Talley, as you mentioned, the 4-star end linebacker out of Philadelphia. They have 5 of 6 or 4-star prospects in that cycle. And they are in great position with a number of 4 and 5 stars in the next class. Here's the problem. If you went back and listened to the Blitz at this time last year, we were probably having the same conversation about players in the class of 2021. Granted, Penn State wasn't this far along in the 2021 class at this time last year. But I just think it's great to pin your hopes on 22 and think that that's going to be the one that is finally the one that competes for a number 1 spot in the country and puts Penn State in a place to be ready to go. But there's still a long time until those guys can sign. If visits become a thing again, which I'm sure they will, by the time that class signs, you're going to always have to worry about decommitments. And that class is a long way from having all the hay in the barn, so to speak. So, I just think that there's a number of reasons why Penn State struggled in PA. There always seems to be one little thing where, oh, they did a great job, but this, or oh, they did a great job, but that. And they have to overcome that here at some point, especially when you look at a guy like Anai White. He's the number one PA player in 2020. They got to land him, but the SEC and Ohio State and everybody else is going to come knocking for him too. So we'll see how things play out. But clearly the 2021 class that was supposed to be, again, the latest one in the last couple to push them over the top isn't going to turn out the way it looked like it could earlier this year and even at some points last year.
Yeah, unfortunate news, but I think your message on the Blitz, because I've been bugging you about this probably dating back to like March and April. You've been pretty consistent in your message that he was by no means a definite to go to Penn State just because his dad went there, and that Wisconsin was always a very serious player, and if anything, Penn State had to catch Wisconsin in the recruiting race. I think you've been pretty clear on that, and that is, I guess, the way it played out. I don't know how close the decision was at the end. They can say whatever they want publicly, but it does sure sound like, the Rucci family felt strongly about Wisconsin, and it was up to Penn State to maybe change their minds, and they just couldn't. So it sounds like he's going to be a great player. Wish him the best. Wisconsin's got a great reputation for developing offensive linemen. I think Penn State fans will definitely be following his progress, much like they're going to follow Julian Fleming's progress, but we will turn the page because we can't talk about Nolan Rucci forever as much as we would like to. Let's get to the fourth down mailbag. Maybe you got some questions and comments about James Franklin and his recruiting approach, but what is on the minds, Greg, of the Penn State fan base?
Yeah, I guess we got to address this, Bob, because we're going to get questions if we don't. So let's just throw it out there. There's a report on Wednesday from the Center Daily Times citing a source that Pat Freiermuth was going to opt out of the 2021 season. It's Thursday, 10 a.m. as we talk. I have not been able to confirm that yet. I haven't seen anybody else confirm it. I'm not saying it's wrong, but at this point, Pat and especially his family have been very vocal throughout this whole process, Bob. They have not said anything in response to this report. You can take that for what it is or what it isn't. Obviously, if we can ever get it confirmed one way or the other, the folks on PennLive will know right away. But that's where we're at on that particular thing, again, at 10 a.m. Thursday morning. So I just wanted to address that so we didn't get questions in next week's mailbag about that, even though we might. Bob, I guess let me just ask you this in a general sense. Do you think it makes any difference? So the Big Ten's obviously dragging its feet here with what's going to happen with the start of a vote to start at a new time.
Right.
Is that going to help or hurt Penn State in a general sense if there are more opt-outs to come? Do you think it matters, or do you think these guys are, going to make their decisions based on, are they going to wait until they see if a fall season's possible, or is it just going to be fall or spring? Some of these guys might just choose to opt out regardless.
Yeah, so I think that, Micah Parsons and Pat Freiermuth are different from some of the other Penn State players on the criteria for opting out. Micah opted out before the Big Ten postponed, but he was clearly very little left to prove. He's a guy that I can see as a top 5 pick. I don't think he's a top 10 pick for sure, but I would say top 5. Pat Freiermuth is getting a lot of first-round love for his 2 years body of work in college, 15 touchdowns, physically looks the part. He's a little bit of an older player. Just to touch on one thing real quick about Pat Freiermuth and that report, the fact that report has been out for almost 24 hours as we tape this, and you haven't heard anything from Penn State or you haven't heard anything from Pat Freiermuth about the validity of it, it just leads me to believe, generally speaking, that I would say that as we talk about this, Greg, he's probably very torn, and he's not quite sure what he wants to do, but he might be leaning in one direction and maybe might be leaning in the direction of the report. But for him not to come out and say anything probably leads me to believe that there's definitely a little bit of smoke there, but I just don't think he's sure. And my point is that I think some of these decisions are dependent upon the players and their parents trying to read the tea leaves with the Big Ten and the chances of whether or not there'll be any football, if not in October, but maybe Thanksgiving. I think when they become convinced that it's probably not going to happen until January at the earliest, then you're going to see some more opt-outs. Freiermuth is obviously at the top of Penn State's list, but they have 5 or 6 other players that are very, very talented that are going to play in the NFL. Michael Mennett is one of them. A guy that hasn't even started yet, Greg, is getting a lot of praise. Jason Awe, he has first-round NFL talent, even though he hasn't started. Tariq Castro-Fields is another a corner with a lot of ability. You can go down the list. Will Fries is another guy. Jeremy Brown, the running back. I just think they know that if they play another college season and they want to, it can enhance their stock, their loyalty to the school. But if they don't think there's going to be football until January, I think you're going to see the dominoes fall. And I think there's so much uncertainty. It's hard to take the Big Ten seriously with regard to what they're really thinking right now. But I think the clock is definitely running out on some of these players. And if you see this uncertainty drag into early October, I think there's almost no question that you will start to see a couple of Penn State players opt out because they got to think about their future. It's hard to trust the Big Ten, Greg. So I do think that Penn State's talent base will definitely be depleted, but I think the fact that the Big Ten is just not in any hurry to change or make any statements, I just think they're almost like they're looking for a smoke signal, Greg. They're looking for some kind of sign with regard to when football is going to restart, and then they're going to react accordingly. But if there's no new information by early October, I think the decision's been made for them.
Yeah, I think you're probably right on with that, Bob. All the other mailbag questions were recruiting, so we're getting a little long here. I'll just touch on that quickly. Obviously, things, again, haven't played out as expected. Yes, we can all agree that Penn State's been hurt pretty significantly by not being able to host visitors since March. And so the key at this point will be to keep pressing forward. But my opinion would be they should take who they need to take in 2021, but save as many scholarships as possible for 2022. Don't take guys that you think could maybe be players, but maybe not, because that 2022 group is loaded. And then if we're right about the fact that Penn State is going to really hammer that class hard, then they'll be just fine moving forward. So I guess with that, 'tis the law. Not so great for us, Bob.
Okay. He ran a very good race, but last week I did give out Honor AP as my choice. I did mention attachment rate as my long shot. I like the way Honor AP finished the race, but he was compromised at the start. I did say that Authentic might not slow down because Bob Baffert, everyone's kind of, with his good horses on the sideline, Nagal and Charlatan and some other horses, Uncle Chuck. Don't forget about him, and you can never forget about him in the Derby. He even had a horse like a minute before the race have to scratch because he fell over, and he still, with the lone speed in the race, got the job done in 8 or 9 to 1. I think there's a lot of conjecture with Bob Baffert and his training methods, but there's no question he can get a horse ready for the Derby. He is the best I think we've ever seen at it. I don't know if Authentic's ever going to run back to that race, but hey, credit to him. I was wrong. There's still a couple of great races coming up with the Preakness and the Breeders' Cup, but I really enjoyed Kentucky Derby Saturday, even though it cost me a lot of money. I know it probably cost you a lot of money, but the good news is, Greg, now we get to turn the page to the NFL and lose even more money.
That's right.
To me, that's exciting, but yeah. This is not the last time we will be wrong about a prediction, but wait till we are right, because we're never going to let you forget it. Greg, it's been great talking to you. Covered a lot of ground this week. I have a funny feeling next week we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff that involves Penn State, maybe an opt-out or two. We'll see, but always good talking with you. It's been another edition of the Penn State Blitz and the Penn State Blitz podcast, and we will see you guys next week.